Have you ever wondered what happens when the biggest band in the world finally decides to snap back? For years, BTS faced a relentless tsunami of doubt, bitter mockery, and baseless hate from critics who called them just another manufactured fading trend. But what if one single, emotionally shattering speech by their fearless leader, RM, completely destroyed every lie ever told about them? What exactly did he reveal on that stage that left the entire music industry absolutely speechless and sent the haters scrabbling for cover? Are you truly ready to uncover the raw, unfiltered truth hiding behind their perfect, shining smiles? Prepare your hearts and minds, because we are diving deep into the most definitive, jaw-dropping moments that silenced the noise and cemented their legendary status forever. Number 7. Jungkook, the crushing burden of gold, unleashed. When RM spoke those defining, earth-shattering words about finding your own voice and ruthlessly ignoring the baseless, toxic noise of the world, absolutely no one felt the profound, agonizing weight of that truth more deeply than Jungkook, the youngest member who practically grew up under the crushing, microscopic scrutiny of an incredibly unforgiving entertainment industry. Imagine for a second being just 15 years old, a time when most kids are merely worrying about high school exams, awkward teenage phases, and figuring out who they are. But instead, you are violently thrust into a ruthless global spotlight, carrying the monumental, suffocating pressure of being dubbed the golden maknae of a hip-hop group that the entire established K-pop hierarchy actively and maliciously wanted to see fail. From the very beginning, when BTS was just a ragtag group of desperate dreamers from a nearly bankrupt, obscure agency called Big Hit Entertainment, the hate directed at Jungkook was vicious, unrelenting, and deeply personal. Critics, industry insiders, and rival fandoms endlessly picked him apart, accusing him of hogging the center stage, calling him a manufactured, soulless product, and actively trying to tear down his fragile confidence every single time he dared to step up, grab the microphone, and shine. They laughed mockingly at their heavy eyeliner and oversized hip-hop concept. They sneered at their cheap, borrowed clothes, and they viciously attacked Jungkook for simply trying to do his absolute best to carry the astronomical hopes of his 6 older brothers on his painfully young, still growing shoulders. Do you remember those grueling, humiliating days of American hustle life back in 2014 when a shy teenage Jungkook was literally roaming the unfamiliar streets of Los Angeles, swallowing his pride and desperately handing out cheap flyers to apathetic strangers just to beg them to attend a free hip-hop concert? The haters and internet trolls conveniently erased those dark days of blood, sweat, and literal tears from their memories, choosing instead to lazily paint BTS's monumental success as an overnight fluke or a product of sheer luck. But RM's fiercely emotional speech completely shattered that false narrative by exposing the agonizing, unseen sacrifices they made in the dark. And Jungkook stands today as the living, breathing, undisputed embodiment of that ultimate sacrifice. During the devastatingly difficult and emotionally turbulent times in 2015 and 2016, when BTS finally started gaining real traction and winning music shows with the Most Beautiful Moment in Life era, the terrified industry retaliated with a massive, coordinated, and utterly ruthless hate train. There were horrific plagiarism accusations that trended worldwide, terrifying Sajigi chart manipulation rumors designed to strip them of their hard-earned achievements, and even malicious petitions created by anti-fans to have the group forcibly disbanded, all while a young, impressionable Jungkook was forced to watch the adults in the music industry try to maliciously destroy the only real family he had ever known. When RM stood on stage, holding back his own tears, and fiercely declared that they would no longer bow, break, or apologize to the malicious words of those who absolutely never understood an ounce of their pain, it was as if a heavy, suffocating iron chain was finally shattered around Jungkook's heart, liberating him from the desperate, exhausting need to be the flawless, perfectly polished, robotic idol that the toxic side of the industry strictly demanded him to be. You can hear this painful, heartbreaking, yet incredibly beautiful evolution clearly in his solo tracks. In his solo song, Begin, he cried out about the sheer agony of seeing his older brothers suffer in silence, delivering a raw, unfiltered confession that undeniably proved his entire universe revolved around the 6 men who practically raised him. While in the R&D masterpiece, My Time, he heartbreakingly reflected on the stolen youth and normal teenage experiences he sacrificed for the sake of survival, questioning if he was moving far too fast in a chaotic world that never even allowed him a moment to just stop and breathe. But the true, undeniable turning point, the spectacular moment the haters were permanently and violently silenced, came when Jungkook made the conscious, bold decision to violently shed the perfect boy next door image and fully embrace his absolute, unapologetic, raw authenticity, bravely covering his arms in deeply meaningful tattoos that told his own unique story, including the BTS Army logo, his debut date, and his life mottos, piercing his face and showing the entire world that he was no longer a frightened, compliant kid trying to please his vicious critics, but a grown, incredibly powerful, fiercely independent artist who completely owned his own destiny. When RM delivered his iconic, historically significant, tear-filled speeches during the grueling Wings tour finale and later on the global stage at the United Nations, passionately urging the youth of the world to speak yourself and actively destroy the suffocating, restrictive boxes society tries to aggressively shove them into, Jungkook took those very words like a blazing torch into the darkness, completely transforming his vocal technique, mastering multiple complex musical genres, and eventually dominating the global charts as a solo powerhouse with massive record-breaking hits like 7 and Standing Next to You, unequivocally proving that genuine, undeniable talent fueled by raw passion, unbreakable brotherhood, and a refusal to quit will always drastically outlive the petty, jealous sneers of anonymous internet trolls. Every single time a bitter hater typed a malicious, soul-destroying comment from the comfort of their bedroom, Jungkook was locked in the studio at 3 a.m., pushing his vocal cords to the absolute limit just to reach the perfect angelic high note. Every time the mainstream media tried to patronizingly downplay their massive cultural impact, Jungkook was out there on stage, dancing with such ferocious intensity that his body literally gave out, collapsing breathless behind the scenes, only to magically plaster on a dazzling, reassuring smile the exact second the blinding stage lights went back on. His awe-inspiring journey is a breathtaking cinematic documentary of sheer human resilience, a masterpiece of a boy who absorbed all the toxic venom, all the heavy doubt, and all the wildly unreasonable expectations of the entire world and magically alchemized it into pure, untouchable chart-topping gold, proudly standing beside his leader, RM, not just as the youngest member of the biggest, most influential band in music history, but as an undeniable, unstoppable force of nature who looked the haters dead in the eye and silenced them completely, not with empty words or petty social media wars, but with a musical legacy so blindingly brilliant, so deeply authentic, and so historically massive that they had absolutely no choice but to shut their mouths and simply watch him conquer the universe.
Number 6, Jimin, the angel who danced through the fires of hell. When you talk about the devastating, soul-crushing impact of RM's impassioned, history-making speeches regarding self-love and ruthlessly tuning out the toxic noise of the world, you absolutely must look at Park Jimin, the ethereal main dancer and lead vocalist who literally walked through the scorching fires of hell to become the global icon he is today. People look at Jimin now and see absolute, untouchable perfection, the breathtaking contemporary dance moves that seem to defy the very laws of physics, the mesmerizing stage presence that effortlessly commands millions of screaming fans, the angelic high notes that pierce straight through the soul, and the historic, groundbreaking achievement of being the very first South Korean solo artist to debut at #1 on the fiercely competitive Billboard 100 with his synth-pop masterpiece Like like crazy. But what the bitter haters, the jealous critics, and the casual observers conveniently ignore is the sheer, agonizing torture this young man endured in the shadows to reach that blinding peak. Let's rewind the tape to the brutal, unforgiving pre-debut days, a time when a desperate, fiercely determined teenager from the coastal city of Busan arrived in the overwhelming metropolis of Seoul with absolutely nothing but a massive dream and a frighteningly short training period of just 6 months, making him the absolute final addition to the BTS lineup and by far the easiest target for immense, suffocating pressure from both the company and the highly critical public. Did you know that Jimin was almost ruthlessly kicked out of the final debut lineup a staggering 8 different times? The powerful agency executives constantly, relentlessly doubted if his unique, high-pitched vocal tone and elegant classical contemporary dance background would ever possibly fit the heavy, gritty, aggressive underground hip-hop concept BTS was originally aiming for. And that constant, terrifying threat of elimination birthed a deeply ingrained, almost destructive perfectionism inside his mind that the malicious internet trolls later weaponized against him. When BTS finally debuted and started fiercely fighting their way up from the absolute bottom of the brutal, highly monopolized K-pop food chain, the attacks directed at Jimin were unusually cruel, deeply personal, and violently targeted his physical appearance, mocking his naturally chubby cheeks, his weight, and his body image, driving him to such dark, desperate places that he resorted to horrific, extreme starvation diets during the critically acclaimed Blood, Sweat, and Tears era. He would literally go days without eating a single proper meal, surviving on practically nothing, pushing his exhausted, trembling, malnourished body through grueling, bone-crushing dance practices until he was literally collapsing, bleeding, and passing out on the cold studio floor, all because he was terrified that if he wasn't physically flawless, the vicious critics and the demanding public would abandon him and tear his beloved group apart. And as if battling his own severe internal mental demons wasn't agonizing enough, Jimin became the primary target of some of the most horrifying, genuinely terrifying cyberbullying and organized hate campaigns in music history, including highly publicized, chilling death threats made against his life during the 2017 Wings tour in the United States, forcing the group to perform under massive, suffocating security cordons and heavy police surveillance, while Jimin bravely stood on stage, plastering on a radiant smile and singing his heart out, fiercely refusing to let his devoted fans see the paralyzing terror that must have been gripping his soul behind the scenes. The haters relentlessly and maliciously mocked his occasional vocal cracks during exhausting, severely sleep-deprived live performances, maliciously compiling them into viral hate videos designed solely to publicly humiliate him, completely ignoring the undeniable, awe-inspiring fact that he was executing incredibly demanding acrobatic choreographies that would leave professional Olympic-level athletes completely breathless and broken. But this is exactly where the monumental, transformative power of RM's leadership and his deeply emotional, fiercely protective speeches changed the entire trajectory of Jimin's life and artistry. When RM stood under those blinding stadium lights and at the prestigious podium of the United Nations, tearfully urging the youth of the world to find your name and find your voice by speaking yourself, and begging the fans to use BTS to love themselves, Jimin was visibly crying on stage, absorbing every single heavy word, because he desperately needed to hear that exact message just as much as the millions of fans watching at home did. RM's unwavering, rock-solid support and the unbreakable, fiercely loyal brotherhood of the 7 members became the absolute fortress that protected Jimin's fragile heart, allowing him to slowly, painfully, but beautifully rebuild his shattered self-esteem and channel his intense, suffocating pain into breathtaking cinematic art that would outlive all the senseless hate. Just listen to the haunting, theatrical masterpiece Lie from the Wings album, where a young, terrified Jimin agonizingly confessed to being hopelessly trapped in a suffocating web of impossible expectations and toxic lies, desperately pleading to be saved from the brutal punishment of his own perfectionism. Or look at his beautiful, self-composed healing anthem, Promise, which broke the entire internet and crashed SoundCloud upon release, serving as a desperate, tearful vow to himself
and to the fans to never throw himself away again just to please the faceless critics hiding in the dark. Then came the incredibly brave, gender-defying triumph of Filter, where he confidently flipped the bird to the rigid, conservative critics who constantly attacked his masculinity, proudly embracing his fluidity and proving that true power lies in unapologetic, raw authenticity. When Jimin finally released his deeply personal solo album, Face, and specifically the explosive, aggressively defiant anthem, Set Me Free Part 2, it was the ultimate deafening mic drop that permanently, violently silenced every single hater who ever dared to doubt his talent. Accompanied by a fierce, militaristic choreography and a massive choir, he boldly screamed to the world that he was finally breaking out of the restrictive, toxic idol mold, openly acknowledging his past pain, his dangerous, desperate relationship with alcohol to cope with the immense, crushing pressure of fame, and declaring absolute, victorious freedom from the malicious judgments that had haunted his every move for a decade. He took the ugliest, most venomous hate the world could possibly throw at a human being, swallowed it whole, and magically spun it into a transcendent, history-making legacy, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is not just the delicate, beautiful angel of BTS, but a fiercely resilient, unbreakable warrior of steel, who, heavily guided by RM's fearless vision and his own indomitable spirit, completely shattered the glass ceiling of the global music industry and forced the entire world, including his most vicious critics, to bow down in absolute awe of his undeniable, breathtaking greatness.
Number 5, Suga, the underground genius who burned the industry to ashes. When RM stood before the world, voice trembling with raw emotion, and delivered that deeply historic, earth-shattering speech about rising above the venomous noise, finding your own name, and fearlessly using your voice to fight back against a cruel world, the profound gravity of those words resonated in the very bones of Min Yoongi, the razor-tongued lead rapper and genius producer who literally crawled his way out of crushing poverty, severe depression, and organized industry sabotage to completely conquer the global music scene. Have you ever taken a moment to truly comprehend the sheer, agonizing hell that Suga had to walk through just to earn the right to hold a microphone on that stage? Before the sold-out stadiums, before the Grammy nominations, and long before he was rubbing shoulders with the absolute titans of the Western music industry, Yoongi was just a starving, desperately ambitious underground rapper in Daegu, going by the name Gloss, selling his meticulously crafted beats for absolute pennies just to survive, often getting cruelly scammed by adults who took his music and refused to pay him a single dime. Imagine for just 1 second the heartbreaking reality of a teenager who had to make the excruciating daily choice between spending his meager pocket money on a cheap bowl of noodles to quiet his screaming stomach, or using that exact same money to pay for the bus ride home, often choosing to walk for hours in the freezing Korean winter just so he could afford to eat. That was the brutal, unforgiving reality of the man the haters later dared to call a manufactured, privileged idol. When he finally took a massive, terrifying leap of faith and moved to Seoul to join Big Hit Entertainment, a tiny, practically bankrupt agency teetering on the absolute edge of financial ruin, the nightmare only intensified, forcing Yoongi to secretly work a dangerous part-time job as a motorcycle delivery boy just to pay his tuition and feed himself, a desperate hustle that tragically resulted in a horrific traffic accident where he was violently struck by a car, completely shattering his shoulder. He hid this agonizing, debilitating injury from his company for months, silently popping painkillers and enduring excruciating agony during intense dance practices, because he was absolutely terrified that if they found out he was broken, they would instantly kick him out of the debut lineup and destroy his one single chance at saving his family from poverty. But the physical pain was absolutely nothing compared to the vicious, soul-destroying psychological warfare he and RM faced from their own peers in the underground hip-hop community.
Do you remember that infamous blood-boiling broadcast in 2013 where underground rapper Be Free publicly, mercilessly, and humiliatingly disrespected RM and Suga to their faces, viciously mocking them for wearing makeup, laughing at their dreams, and aggressively branding them as pathetic sellouts who had betrayed the pure essence of hip-hop just to become K-pop puppets? They were violently trapped in the most agonizing middle ground imaginable, fiercely despised by the underground hip-hop scene for being too pop, and ruthlessly rejected by the mainstream K-pop industry for being too ugly, too aggressive, and lacking the pristine manufactured perfection expected of traditional idols. Every single day, anti-fans and jealous rival fandoms would flood the internet with highly coordinated hate campaigns, trending malicious hashtags, accusing them of plagiarism, and sending genuinely terrifying death threats, praying for their absolute downfall, while Yoongi sat alone in the dark, suffocating under the immense weight of social anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and severe depression. But this is exactly where the absolute brilliance of RM's leadership and BTS's unbreakable brotherhood turned a victim into an unstoppable fire-breathing conqueror. Instead of breaking down and quitting like the haters desperately wanted, Yoongi channeled every single ounce of that toxic venom, every sleepless night crying on the bathroom floor, and every sneer from the industry elitists into his music, transforming his trauma into a devastating, untouchable weapon of mass destruction. Under his raw, unfiltered alter ego, August D, he dropped a deeply shocking, brutally honest mixtape that completely shattered the fake, heavily policed illusion of the perfect K-pop idol, specifically in his masterpiece track, The Last, where he bravely and unapologetically confessed his harrowing experiences inside a psychiatric ward, his terrifying battles with social phobia, and the agonizing price of fame, forcing the highly conservative Korean society to finally look mental health dead in the eye. When RM declared that they would no longer bow to the baseless hatred of their critics, Suga took that as a battle cry, producing explosive, unapologetic diss tracks like the legendary Cypher series and the global phenomenon Mic Drop, directly taunting the haters who said they would fail, explicitly telling them to look at their massive success, their stuffed trophy bags, and their sold-out stadium tours, while the critics themselves remained bitter, anonymous, and entirely irrelevant. The ultimate poetic revenge, the exact moment the entire industry was permanently and violently silenced, was watching the exact same snobby producers, artists, and music executives who once relentlessly mocked him and treated him like absolute garbage, suddenly lining up at his door, desperately begging for a Suga-produced track to save their failing careers, while he casually went on to produce chart-topping masterpieces for global legends like Coldplay, Halsey, Psy, and Juice WRLD, proving that true, undeniable genius cannot ever be suffocated by petty jealousy. When BTS won their very first monumental Mama Artist of the Year Day song in 2016, and Yoongi finally broke down on stage, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands, those were not tears of sadness, but the heavy, overwhelming tears of a warrior who had marched through the deepest, darkest fires of hell, survived the most brutal hate train in modern music history, and emerged completely victorious. He is the living, breathing, undisputed embodiment of RM's powerful message, a man who took the heavy stones thrown at him by his haters and used them to build an indestructible, sky-high fortress of monumental success, looking down from the absolute summit of the global music industry with a smirk, dropping his mic and leaving his critics choking in the dust of his legendary, untouchable greatness.
Number 4V, the hidden weapon who conquered the world, Unveiled. Have you ever felt the agonizing, suffocating sting of being entirely erased from your own story before it even had the chance to officially begin, forced to watch from the cold, lonely shadows while everyone else around you stepped into the blinding light? When we talk about the deeply profound, life-altering impact of RM's historic, tear-filled speeches regarding the brutal necessity of owning your true identity and fiercely ignoring the venomous, baseless judgments of a highly toxic society, we absolutely cannot ignore the heartbreaking and awe-inspiring journey of Kim Tae-young, widely known as V, the soulful, mesmerizing baritone vocalist who literally had to fight just to prove he even existed. Let's take a painful journey back to the dark, grueling pre-debut days of 2012, a time when big hit entertainment made the highly controversial, emotionally devastating strategic decision to keep Tae-young completely hidden from the public eye as their secret weapon, a marketing tactic that severely traumatized a young, incredibly affectionate teenager who just wanted to belong. While the other 6 members were excitedly filming introductory vlogs, interacting with their small but growing fan base, and building their public profiles, Tae-young was cruelly forced to hide in the corners of the cramped, freezing dorms, literally standing by the trash cans just out of the camera's frame, silently weeping because he genuinely believed the agency was going to abruptly fire him and that he would never get to debut with the brothers he had grown to fiercely love. When the agonizing curtain was finally lifted and he was officially introduced just weeks before their 2013 debut, you would think the struggle was over, but the ruthless, unforgiving reality of the K-pop industry was just beginning to unleash its vicious cruelty upon him. The moment he stepped onto the stage, the malicious internet trolls, the highly biased industry insiders, and the bitter rival fandoms immediately targeted his most unique, beautiful qualities, maliciously branding his eccentric, wonderfully free-spirited, and deeply artistic personality as weird, fake, or attention-seeking, aggressively slapping him with the incredibly offensive nickname Alien, simply because his brilliant mind operated on a magical, creative frequency that their narrow, conventional brains could not even begin to comprehend. Furthermore, his breathtaking, deeply resonant, husky baritone voice, a glorious, soulful instrument that is incredibly rare in the modern music industry, was heavily criticized and mercilessly mocked by so-called vocal experts who lazily claimed it was entirely unfit for the bright, high-pitched, heavily manufactured world of mainstream pop music, constantly pressuring him to change his natural tone, warning him that his distinct sound would ultimately drag the rest of the group down. Imagine the immense, soul-crushing weight of carrying that toxic negativity in your heart, constantly being told that your very essence, your natural voice, and your unique personality are fatal liabilities to the people you care most about in the world. But this is precisely where the monumental, transformative power of RM's visionary leadership and his deeply moving speeches about radical self-love fundamentally altered the entire trajectory of Tae-young. When RM stood at the prestigious United Nations podium and passionately pleaded with the youth to speak yourself, to embrace their flaws, and to unapologetically find their own name, regardless of their skin color or gender identity, he was directly validating the beautiful, unconventional soul of Kim Tae-young. Empowered by RM's unwavering, rock-solid support and the fiercely protective brotherhood of BTS, V made the incredibly brave, defiant decision to stop apologizing for his uniqueness and instead weaponize it into an untouchable cinematic masterpiece of artistry that the world had never seen before. When the haters loudly claimed he lacked vocal range, he violently silenced them by delivering the breathtaking, spine-tingling falsettos in his neo-soul solo track, Stigma, a deeply painful, incredibly raw confession about carrying the heavy burdens of his past and desperately seeking redemption, completely shattering the myth that he was just a visually pleasing background vocalist.
When the critics condescendingly dismissed his acting debut in the historical drama Hwarang, citing the industry's deeply ingrained prejudice against idol actors, he pushed through agonizing exhaustion, juggling a punishing globe-trotting tour schedule while learning to ride horses and memorize complex scripts, delivering a devastatingly emotional performance that left seasoned actors and directors in absolute awe of his raw, natural talent. But the ultimate, deafening mic drop, the spectacular moment he permanently crushed his doubters into dust, was the release of his intoxicating, critically acclaimed solo track Singularity, a seductive, incredibly complex R&B masterpiece that major global publications like the New York Times and The Guardian immediately hailed as one of the greatest songs of the year, completely mesmerized by his rich, chocolatey vocals and his hauntingly theatrical, mask-wielding choreography that elevated K-pop into the realm of highbrow performance art. He didn't just stop there. He channeled his deep, profound empathy and his beautifully observant nature into writing completely self-composed, record-breaking healing anthems like Scenery, Winter Bear, and Sweet Night, tracks that absolutely dominated global iTunes charts and completely crashed streaming platforms, proving that he didn't need heavily produced mainstream pop formulas to capture the hearts of millions. When he finally unleashed his highly anticipated solo album, Layover, he boldly and unapologetically defied every single current musical trend, refusing to release a generic, TikTok-friendly dance track, and instead gifting the world a breathtakingly gorgeous, deeply nostalgic collection of jazz, R&B, and lo-fi soul that perfectly encapsulated his true, unfiltered identity, instantly breaking historical sales records and forcing the global music industry to realize that true artistry cannot be rushed, boxed in, or dictated by viral algorithms. He evolved from the terrified, hidden boy crying by the trash can into the undisputed, globally recognized face of K-pop, the ultimate muse for high-fashion luxury brands like Celine and Cartier, and a universally respected musical auteur who proudly wears his quirks like shining medals of honor. Every single time a bitter hater tried to tear him down, Taehyung simply smiled his iconic boxy smile, adjusted his invisible crown, and painted the world in his own stunning shades of purple, standing fiercely beside RM as the living, breathing proof that the things society tells you are your greatest flaws are actually the exact magical ingredients destined to make you an unforgettable history-making legend, silencing the venomous noise forever, not by changing who he is, but by forcing the entire universe to tune in and listen to his beautiful, unique melody.
Number 3, J-Hope, the smiling assassin who destroyed the shadows, unmasked. When you deeply analyze the world-stopping monumental gravity of RM's tear-soaked, history-defining speech about radically accepting your true, unfiltered self and brutally cutting out the venomous noise of the haters, you are inevitably forced to look at the agonizing, deeply inspiring, and radically transformative journey of Jungho Swak, universally known as J-Hope, the undisputed dance captain and glowing pillar of BTS, who literally had to swallow his own suffocating darkness just to become the world's blinding sunshine. People casually look at J-Hope today and see the absolute zenith of charismatic perfection, the untouchable, gravity-defying main dancer who can effortlessly command a stadium of 80,000 screaming fans with a single flick of his wrist, the vibrant, ever-smiling energy source of the group, and the history-making icon who absolutely shattered the glass ceiling by becoming the very first South Korean artist to headline a major mainstream American music festival at Lollapalooza. But what the incredibly toxic critics and the ignorant public completely fail to understand is the sheer psychological torture he had to silently endure to build that magnificent bulletproof facade.
Let's take a brutal trip down memory lane to the gritty, unforgiving underground street dance scene of Gwangju, where a young, fiercely talented, and highly respected dancer known as Smile Hoya dominated the local battles with his crew Neuron, completely unaware of the brutal emotional meat grinder that the highly manufactured, fiercely competitive K-pop idol industry was preparing to throw him into. When he finally made the terrifying journey to Seoul to join the nearly bankrupt Big Hit Entertainment, he was completely out of his element, a pure dancer thrust into a heavily intimidating room full of battle-tested, razor-sharp underground rappers like RM and Suga, forcing him to painstakingly, agonizingly learn how to rap entirely from scratch, staying up into the brutal hours of the morning, desperately studying rhythm and flow, while his exhausted body screamed for mercy, just so he could prove he deserved to stand beside them. The crushing pressure became so unimaginably heavy during their dark pre-debut days that Hoswak actually made the heartbreaking, tear-filled decision to quit the group entirely, packing his bags and leaving the dorm in a deeply emotional moment that left Jungkook sobbing uncontrollably. And it was only because RM fiercely, stubbornly went straight to the agency executives, passionately demanding they bring Hoswak back because BTS cannot exist without him, that the group's absolute core was saved from permanent destruction. But coming back was only the beginning of his agonizing trial by fire, because the exact second BTS debuted and stepped into the brutal, hypercritical spotlight, the vicious, highly organized internet trolls and superficial industry insiders launched a relentless, deeply cruel, and highly targeted campaign against his physical appearance, brutally and maliciously branding him as the ugly whole of the group, flooding their live broadcast with so much toxic, hate-filled garbage that Hoswak would silently hand the camera over to the other members, physically withdrawing into the shadows with a heartbreakingly forced smile so he wouldn't ruin the broadcast for his brothers. Imagine the excruciating, soul-crushing agony of adopting the stage name J-Hope, actively forcing yourself to be the literal embodiment of bright, unwavering optimism and relentless joy for your members and your fans, while simultaneously being torn to absolute shreds by anonymous cowards who constantly told you that you didn't deserve to be a K-pop idol. It was a deeply traumatizing psychological warfare that forced him to lock his own legitimate fears, massive anxieties, and crippling insecurities inside a dark, hidden box deep within his heart. Every single time a hater viciously attacked his visuals or lazily dismissed his rapping skills, J-Hope completely retreated into the freezing, dimly lit dance studio, punishing himself with grueling, bone-breaking practice sessions, meticulously dissecting every single micro-movement of BTS's fiercely complicated choreographies, evolving into the group's terrifyingly strict, undisputed dance leader who pushed all 7 members to absolute, undeniable machine-like perfection, creating the exact legendary, perfectly synchronized stage performances that eventually forced the entire global industry to bow down in absolute awe. When RM delivered that awe-inspiring, generation-defining speech at the United Nations, begging the world to speak their truth and embrace their hidden scars, it was the exact catalyst J-Hope desperately needed to finally stop violently suppressing his own inner demons and beautifully, artistically unleash them upon the world. He initially tested the waters with his vibrant, globally successful solo mixtape Hope World, bringing his signature, colorful energy to the global charts. But the true, earth-shattering paradigm shift, the exact spectacular moment the haters were violently, permanently silenced and left absolutely choking on their own venom, occurred when he aggressively shattered his own sunny, pristine idol image with the release of his intensely dark, heavily grunge-inspired, critically acclaimed solo album Jack in the Box. He boldly, unapologetically incinerated the happy virus persona that society had forcefully chained him to for a decade, emerging from the fiery ashes with a gritty, aggressive, old-school hip-hop sound, delivering spectacular, fiercely theatrical masterpieces like More and Arson that directly confronted his agonizing burnout, his immense, suffocating artistic greed, his paralyzing fears, and the terrifying, heavy crown of unprecedented unprecedented global fame, explicitly showing the world the bleeding, raw, deeply human artist that had always been hiding beneath the bright, perfectly manufactured smile. When RM stepped confidently onto the colossal, history-making main stage at Lollapalooza in Chicago, dramatically bursting out of a literal physical box before a staggering, roaring crowd of over 100,000 people, completely alone, without his 6 brothers to fall back on, executing a flawlessly raw, rock-infused, ferociously intense hour-and-a-half set that left seasoned Western music critics and massive global publications absolutely speechless. He permanently, violently destroyed the pathetic, racist, and highly xenophobic narrative that K-pop idols were just manufactured, talentless puppets. He took the absolute worst, most vicious, deeply personal hatred the world could ever possibly throw at a human being, weaponized his own agonizing pain, and beautifully alchemized it into a transcendent, untouchable, genre-defying legacy of pure artistic genius, proving himself to be the indispensable bridge connecting the ferocious rap line and the angelic vocal line. Standing shoulder to shoulder with RM as the unyielding, fiercely loyal backbone of the biggest group on the planet, he left every single bitter critic, every internet troll, and every industry elitist utterly defeated, staring in absolute awe at the spectacular blazing trail of fire left behind by the absolute, undisputed king of the stage, who proved once and for all that the brightest, most blinding light is always born from conquering the deepest, darkest shadows. Number 2. Jin, the silver voice that shattered the glass castle. When RM passionately delivered that historic, paradigm-shifting monologue about tearing down the suffocating walls of societal expectations, discovering your true name, and fearlessly embracing every single hidden flaw, no one's heart resonated with a more agonizingly beautiful, triumphant frequency than Kim Sek-jin, the fiercely protective eldest brother and the undisputed silver voice of BTS, who literally had to wage a brutal, silent, decade-long war against the entire world just to prove he was infinitely more than a pretty face. Have you ever truly stopped to comprehend the sheer, terrifying, soul-crushing weight of being ruthlessly reduced to nothing but an aesthetic object, constantly having your immense, bleeding heart and raw, undeniable talent violently erased by an industry that only values superficial, manufactured perfection? Let's rewind the grueling tape back to his unbelievable movie-like origins when a young, brilliantly intelligent acting major at the highly prestigious Jungkook University was literally chased down the street by big-hit entertainment casting directors simply because his striking, godlike visuals were so undeniably breathtaking that they practically stopped traffic. But that exact monumental blessing quickly mutated into an agonizing, suffocating curse the exact moment he stepped into the training rooms. Unlike the battle-hardened underground rappers or the prodigy street dancers in the group, Sek-jin entered the fiercely competitive, fiercely unforgiving K-pop training system with absolutely zero foundational background in singing or dancing, thrust into a terrifying high-stakes environment where he was forced to desperately keep up with terrifyingly gifted prodigies who had been breathing music since childhood. The malicious haters, the superficial industry insiders, and the incredibly toxic internet trolls immediately, mercilessly latched onto his early struggles, aggressively and cruelly branding him as the visual filler, an untalented, manufactured puppet who was only placed in the group to attract teenage fangirls. Viciously mocking his initially stiff choreography and aggressively demanding that his vocal lines be completely stripped away. Imagine the sheer, agonizing psychological torture of being the eldest brother, fiercely determined to protect and nurture your 6 younger members, cooking for them, driving them to school, and acting as their unshakable, smiling, emotional pillar, while secretly, in the dead of the freezing night, you are locking yourself in the dance studio until your bones practically shatter, crying in complete isolation because the vicious, venomous comments are constantly telling you that you are nothing but a useless, heavy burden dragging your beloved family down. Every single time the vicious critics tried to tear his self-esteem to absolute shreds, Sekjin ingeniously, brilliantly weaponized his own radiant personality, using his famous, incredibly endearing dad jokes, his iconic, infectious windshield wiper laugh, and his wildly exaggerated theatrical confidence as an impenetrable psychological armor, a brilliant defense mechanism designed specifically to keep the dark, suffocating shadows of the brutal industry at bay, while simultaneously keeping the morale of his younger brothers sky high during their darkest, most desperate hours. But this is precisely where the sheer, indomitable willpower of Kim Sek-jin, massively ignited by RM's visionary, fearless leadership, sparked one of the most spectacular, breathtaking, and awe-inspiring artistic evolutions in the entire history of the global music industry. When RM begged the world to radically love themselves, Jin took that powerful message and transformed it into an indestructible, bulletproof shield. Instead of breaking under the immense, crushing pressure of the hate train, Jin completely locked himself into a brutal, relentless vocal training regimen, pushing his lung capacity and his vocal cords to absolute, unimaginable limits, violently shedding the heavy, toxic labels forced upon him to emerge as an absolute vocal powerhouse with a breathtaking, deeply resonant, emotionally devastating belting range that leaves professional vocal coaches and Grammy voting panels completely speechless. Just deeply analyze his spectacular, gravity-defying, spine-tingling falsettos in incredibly difficult tracks like the Japanese release Crystal Snow, or his ferociously aggressive, intensely powerful rock belting in the stadium-shaking masterpiece Dionysus, where he flawlessly executes incredibly demanding Olympic-level choreographies without dropping a single breath, proving that his live vocal stability is practically superhuman and entirely unmatched in the mainstream pop landscape. The undeniable, earth-shattering turning point, the exact moment he permanently and violently silenced every single hater who ever dared to question his musical legitimacy, was the incredibly painful, raw, and brutally honest confession in his self-composed solo masterpiece Awake from the legendary Wings album. With a heartbreakingly beautiful, soaring melody, he openly, bravely admitted to his deepest, most agonizing insecurities, confessing that while he might never be able to naturally fly as high as the other 6 shining petals, he would stubbornly, fiercely continue to walk, run, and fight with every single ounce of his bleeding soul just to stay by their side. He took the absolute ugliest, most venomous criticism the world threw at him and alchemized it into pure, untouchable cinematic gold, culminating in the historically monumental, deeply healing, stadium-shaking anthem Epiphany, where he stood completely alone on massive global stages, playing the piano under a single blinding spotlight, commanding 80,000 screaming, weeping fans as he powerfully, tearfully belted out the ultimate declaration of radical self-love, proving that acknowledging your flaws is the most terrifyingly beautiful superpower a human being can possess. And as if completely conquering the global music charts and establishing himself as a universally respected, critically acclaimed musician was not enough to permanently crush his doubters, Jin delivered the ultimate, deafening mic drop to the incredibly toxic, highly politicized, and sensationalized media circus surrounding BTS's military enlistment. While the politicians bickered endlessly and the haters maliciously prayed for their absolute downfall, Jin boldly, proudly, and fearlessly stepped forward as the very first member to bravely march into the freezing, grueling South Korean military, releasing the breathtaking Coldplay-produced rock anthem as a beautiful, tear-jerking love farewell letter to his fans, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that his loyalty, his honor, and his immense universe-sized heart are absolutely unbreakable. He marched into the harsh, demanding reality of active duty, excelled beyond all human expectations to become an elite special-class warrior, and returned as an undisputed, universally respected global king, leaving the bitter, anonymous internet trolls absolutely choking on their own pathetic, irrelevant venom. Kim Sek-jin is the living, breathing, awe-inspiring testament to the profound, world-changing truth within RM's speech, completely shattering the superficial glass castle the industry desperately tried to trap him in, rising from the absolute depths of crippling self-doubt to become a fiercely resilient, globally recognized, immensely talented vocal titan who looked the entire world dead in the eye, flashed his iconic, devastatingly handsome, worldwide handsome smile, and proved once and for all that true legendary greatness is never just handed to you on a silver platter. It is brutally, beautifully, and fiercely earned through blood, sweat, and an unbreakable radical love for yourself.
Number 1, RM, the fearless titan who rebuilt the universe with his words. When you finally trace back the magnificent, world-conquering, indestructible DNA of the biggest band in the history of modern music to its absolute singular origin point, you inevitably find yourself standing before the colossal, awe-inspiring, and profoundly burdened figure of Kim Namjoon, universally revered as RM, the visionary leader, the philosophical anchor, and the fearless titan who literally birthed BTS into existence and absorbed the most venomous, concentrated hatred the world had to offer just to shield his 6 beloved brothers. To truly understand the world-stopping, monumental gravity of the tear-soaked, emotionally shattering speeches that permanently silenced the haters and completely rewrote the rules of the global music industry, you must first comprehend the sheer, terrifying, soul-crushing weight of the invisible crown RM has worn since he was just a deeply conflicted teenager. Let's travel back to the gritty, fiercely competitive, and unapologetically raw underground hip-hop scene of South Korea, where a terrifyingly gifted, razor-sharp prodigy known as Runch Randa was rapidly making a massive name for himself, possessing a lyrical genius and a complex intellectual flow that left seasoned veteran rappers completely speechless and terrified of his potential. But when Namjoon made the monumental, deeply agonizing, and heavily stigmatized decision to sign with a nearly bankrupt, totally obscure agency called Big Hit Entertainment to become a K-pop idol, the immediate, violent backlash was enough to completely break a normal human being's spirit into a million irreparable pieces. He was instantly, viciously, and maliciously ostracized by his own peers in the underground community, who cruelly branded him a pathetic, money-hungry sellout who had shamelessly traded his authentic hip-hop soul from makeup, synchronized dancing, and manufactured pop garbage, culminating in that incredibly infamous, blood-boiling 2013 broadcast where underground rapper B. Free publicly, humiliatingly, and relentlessly verbally assaulted Namjoon and Yoongi to their faces, mocking their life choices and actively trying to strip away every single ounce of their dignity. And the absolute nightmare only compounded the exact second BTS debuted, because the fiercely judgmental, hyper-superficial mainstream K-pop audience aggressively rejected him as well, launching horrific, highly coordinated, and deeply personal hate campaigns targeting his physical appearance, maliciously calling him too ugly to be an idol, creating viral, trending hashtags, actively demanding that he be permanently removed from his own group, and sending him genuinely terrifying death threats that forced him to question his own right to exist.
Imagine the excruciating, suffocating psychological torture of being the supreme leader and the foundational pillar of a desperately struggling group, holding the fragile dreams of 6 younger boys entirely in your hands, writing and producing the vast majority of their discography under insanely crushing deadlines, while simultaneously drowning in a massive, paralyzing ocean of severe self-hatred, desperately trying to find your own identity while the entire world screams that you are fundamentally broken and unwanted. But this is precisely where the awe-inspiring, indomitable, and radically transformative genius of Kim Nam-joon completely changed the course of musical history. Instead of bowing down, breaking, or surrendering to the malicious, toxic noise of the haters, he took every single venomous insult, every agonizing moment of self-doubt, and every tear shed in the freezing, lonely darkness of his studio, and brilliantly, artistically alchemized them into a devastatingly powerful, philosophically profound, and historically monumental lyrical universe. He bravely, unapologetically shed the restrictive, aggressive rap monster moniker and evolved into RM, representing a deeply reflective, fiercely authentic journey to find his real me, dropping his incredibly raw, highly acclaimed solo playlist Mono, which served as a devastatingly beautiful, deeply comforting hug for every single broken soul in the world who was silently suffering in the rain. When the group finally exploded onto the global stage and faced the terrifying, highly xenophobic, and deeply dismissive Western music industry, RM bore the unimaginable, terrifying responsibility of being the sole English speaker, the protective shield, and the primary cultural diplomat for his brothers, flawlessly answering incredibly condescending interview questions with breathtaking grace, razor-sharp intellect, and terrifying poise, having painstakingly taught himself fluent English simply by watching the sitcom Friends on DVD. The absolute spectacular climax, the exact earth-shattering moment the haters were permanently, violently silenced and completely erased from relevance, was when RM stood tall at the prestigious, highly intimidating podium of the United Nations General Assembly in 2018, hands shaking but his spirit absolutely unbreakable, delivering a generation-defining, tear-inducing speech that will be etched into the very fabric of human history. Looking directly into the cameras, addressing millions of terrified, lost, and broken youth across the globe, he beautifully, vulnerably confessed to his own deep, agonizing flaws and his past mistakes, powerfully declaring that yesterday's him is still him, and passionately urging the entire world to aggressively tear down the suffocating boxes of gender, race, and societal expectations to speak yourself and find your own name. That deeply emotional, radically authentic monologue wasn't just a speech, it was a devastating, untouchable mic drop, a massive, victorious battle cry that completely destroyed the deeply ingrained, incredibly toxic myth that idols were just brainless, manufactured puppets, elevating BTS from a massive boy band to universally respected, globally influential cultural ambassadors and modern-day philosophers. Every single time a bitter, anonymous hater typed a malicious comment, RM was out there passionately speaking at the White House, meeting with world leaders to actively combat anti-Asian hate, releasing breathtaking, deeply introspective, globally acclaimed solo masterpieces like Indigo and Right Place, Wrong Person, and leading his 6 brothers to sold-out historic stadium tours across the entire planet, completely rewriting the history books and stuffing their bags with so many day songs and global accolades that they literally ran out of space to hold them. He absorbed the absolute worst, most concentrated and vicious toxicity the universe could possibly throw at him, and miraculously, beautifully transformed it into an unstoppable, healing movement of radical self-love that saved millions of lives, standing at the absolute untouchable summit of the global music industry as a fiercely intelligent, profoundly compassionate, and fiercely resilient titan, looking down at the irrelevant, defeated critics with a peaceful, knowing smile, proving absolutely and forever that the most terrifying, indestructible weapon a human being can possess is a fiercely authentic voice that absolutely refuses to be silenced.